This is the final session of a series called The Reference Desk, and it's the 19th of June in my part of the world, 18th of June in other parts of the world. I'm going to share my screen and offer a few thoughts on the motivation for the series and some tentative ideas at the end of the series. And then I'm going to welcome others who are in the session to give their thoughts as well. So let me just share the screen here. Well, we've had about 14 sessions in this series that we call the Reference Desk, how digital platforms and technologies are supporting Baha'i scholarship. The idea of the series was to look at this traditional concept of scholarship as being supported by reference services, obviously book collections and libraries, organized libraries with their catalogs and bibliographies and other specialist materials, chronologies, glossaries, subject indexes. But this pre-digital era made these materials very hard to access. They were in large libraries, you had to travel there. It's quite a privileged occupation to be able to go and use reference services to find the topics of interest to you. And in this case, it's to do with Baha'i studies, Baha'i scholarship. Now, Baha'i institutions do develop sets of historical materials, administrative materials, other materials, publications. And the question is, how are these being made available in the digital era? So we invited a range of webmasters, bibliographers, genealogists, librarians, archivists to speak about their experience. The other part of the motivation for the series was that these webmasters had not really had an opportunity previously to explain their motivation, their processes, their challenges. So that was the other aspect of starting this series. Now, in focusing on these reference services, it meant that there were so many other types of digital sites of interest to Baha'i studies that weren't considered. Particularly, there are sites that do bring together histories, biographies. There are individual sites by scholars bringing together all their materials. You could say they're reference desk material as well, but they didn't come into the series, perhaps for a later time. I want to just offer some, what I might call tangential thoughts behind my thinking about information management, knowledge management, and project management. And I start with a book that I came across in the 1990s, which talked about 8 key information actions. You can see them here, that we create information, we change it, we store it, we retrieve it, we integrate it, we make decisions using that information, and then we communicate and we discard. And at the time, as a young researcher, I thought, well, this is quite straightforward. How can you have a book that talks about these information actions? Because this is some quite obvious steps. But it turned out in the digital era that these information actions are actually quite significant and quite complex to undertake. Now, this same book came to these conclusions that why we need to talk about our information management is that we need to re-engineer our processes. We need to make our information more accessible. We need to streamline the way we use information, remove those islands of information that aren't connected to each other, and also to reduce information overload. So this type of advice became all the more important in the digital era when information became so easily and readily available. And it was quite possible to collect a large amount of information, and without having a method for storing it and accessing it, we could get swamped with data and information, and that swamping inhibited our ability to use the information to create knowledge, which surely is the purpose of any information service, is that we come to some beneficial finding based on the information that we've been able to procure. So these are some of the fundamental ideas, and eventually I streamlined them. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the next few slides. Going back to this theme of pre-digital knowledge management and post-digital, this chart pulls together this basic idea that you have primary materials and you have secondary materials. This is common, this is well known to researchers. And in the Baha'i context, the primary materials include all the Baha'i writings, official writings, scriptures, and then a whole range of secondary materials, which is commentary on those writings, but also the many other aspects of scholarship in the social sciences and humanities, and indeed other fields as well, that are emerging based on consideration of Baha'i scripture and then Baha'i practice and the implementation of Baha'i ideals and values in the world. And that literature is burgeoning. Now, in that pre-digital era, we used catalogs, indexes, chronologies, compendiums, and as we know, this was in printed form. Access to this material was discrete in the sense that it was by an individual in an individual setting, such as an institutional library. And that model has been completely blown apart by the availability of digital technologies. That information, that data, and those knowledge products are now housed in a range of platforms, the large commercial platforms, which we aren't articulating here, but known to researchers, the large commercial platforms that have managed to procure ownership of journals and books and put them behind paywalls, and hence still quite privileged information. There's the public institutions, government institutions, and public universities, where this information can be available online, but you find most universities, again, have, it's not necessarily a paywall, but a privilege wall, but behind which, for example, they may include all of their theses that have come through their particular university. And then there's other private universities, academies. But what the digital era has done is expanded this knowledge repositories into, let's say communities, communities of scholars, scholarly organizations that pool their knowledge, and it might be, say, a society of engineers or of educators or scientists, or who bring their materials together under their organization. And then there's the individuals. The power of the digital age is that individuals can set up a portal and they can bring together data, information, knowledge, and they can share it with the world. Now, these digital platforms still have the traditional reference services of catalogs, indexes, chronologies, etc. But there's a range of new technologies that are available for search, including alert services, which again, we haven't articulated in the series, but are well known to researchers. An alert service might be a global service, such as a Google Scholar alert, or just a general Google alert, but it might be, for example, a parliamentary search bot, or for example, at the United Nations Library, or many other types of large institutions that allow for alert services that will bring material to you. And there are other types of search bots that you can send out to bring back the information that you specifically are interested in. The other really significant change in search is that it's now full text. So whereas you used to search through catalogs, because the text of a printed book was not accessible, we now have full text search. And this has completely changed our ability to find data and information and indeed knowledge. And then hyperlinking is another method by which we create synergies between bodies of knowledge, removing islands of information. And also a range of citation tools that allow us to search on the basis of recognition of literature by other peers. And so these are powerful new implements in search that are only with us through the digital age. So one of the most important aspects of the distinction there between the pre-digital and the digital is that access previously was by an individual in a discrete manner, and now access is global and potentially available to all. So an explosion of information access. I'm going to pull together two ideas here. One that we've already referred to, that there are different grades of information that start with raw data, which hasn't been processed, but it's access to facts. When we start to inquire into those facts because we have a particular question in mind, we can sift for the information we need. And then through the process of scholarship, we can generate knowledge. And that is attached to a rubric, a well-known rubric known as Bloom's Taxonomy of Critical Thinking. And that critical thinking from just gathering information, organizing it, analyzing it, and coming up with new created knowledge can be associated with this task of information in the digital era. They come together, these two aspects of practice. And then we find that there are studies such as, if you haven't seen this, you can search for 400 plus tools and innovations in scholarly communication. And you find this project that was started perhaps a decade ago to explore the range of tools that are available in scholarship. And you'll see under this model, they have created these 6 categories in which digital platforms are used. Let's start with discovery, a range of tools, and these are articulated on an Excel sheet that you can look at for the detail. They've called discovery, which we had previously called search. And then analysis, for example, having found material, which is the most popular in a field, which is the most cited and found to be useful. And then there are tools for writing, which in information tool terminology requires a retrieval of the information that you found and the use of it. And then the whole field of publication, dissemination, you could call it, which is linked to outreach. Not just merely writing, but finding ways in which that writing reaches its intended audience. And they've also got this very useful category of assessment tools to determine the worth of work and its impact. Now, for personal ease, I've reduced these actions on the previous slides and this one to 4 key information actions that guide my assessment of a site or my own work. That we need tools to find information, we need tools to store it, we need tools to retrieve it, and then we need tools to use it. So each of these terms is deceptively simple and yet very complex, because when you say, well, we find information, often in conversation, someone might say to you, where do you find your material? Because there's a set of skills there in finding the appropriate materials for your projects. And that's all the use of search engines, search bots, monitoring of sites, knowing where to find materials, but having found it, the important stage of how to store it. Storage means long-term security for that material that you've taken the trouble to find. And digital platforms are notoriously brittle in many ways, vulnerable. So there's the whole science of backup, etc. Because the larger the amount of data that you acquire, then the larger the storage need and the larger the vulnerability of your reservoir of information. And of course, the complexity of retrieval is linked to the size of the information that you've stored. The ability to do complex search, whether on your own material or on material that is stored on the web generally. And then, of course, that large area of use, what does it mean to use and use effectively? So these 4 practice areas are very important to the individual scholar. And I think that the individual scholar judges portals that they use on their ability in these ways. It might be intuitive, but if you go to a portal where you can't easily find information, you can't easily retrieve, you know it's in there somewhere, but it's not made retrievable for you. It makes that site harder to use. So there's a necessary marriage here between the user of the portal and the designer of the portal, and that user interface has become an important science in the practice of information management. Well, let's move on from that interesting slide to look a little about project management. I didn't put a definition of project management, but I've had to think about this quite a bit. Let me say, it's not on the slide there, but the concept of project management, that a project has a specific purpose, uses a specific pool of resources within a specified time frame, and then you have a project. And that if you don't have these ingredients, you have activity, but it's not necessarily a project. It is some other type of activity. So what I've done here is distinguish between some characteristics of projects and the distinctions between an institutional project and an individual project. So for example, the mission of, let's say, a university library will be established by agreement. There'll be some statement which is a shared understanding of why a library is being set up, what its purposes are. And that statement will be agreed to by a whole body of people who are interested in that institution. Whereas in an individual project, it's self-directed, that the person who sets up the project can set up their mission, they decide it, they might write a statement, or they might just start the project because it's their personal choice. Then look at that second line of resources. Clearly, an institutional project will have a set budget for a year or a 5-year period. It will be known what the anticipated resource use will be and the needs. There's an institutional framework around resources. But with an individual project, resources obviously are personal resources, and the project will simply extend as far as that individual person or small group of people are prepared to divest themselves of those resources. On the matter of time frame, institutions will often have time frames around their development, the projects they're going to undertake. There'll be set periods for that, after which they will reassess. But often with an individual project, it's merely a continuing, it's in a sense, this can be called a passion project, where there's no time frame. It's just a love of doing that project, and there's no end time in sight. It's just, it's the intrinsic worth of doing the project. Those factors have an influence on the sustainability of a project. So I've called for institutions a measured sustainability. There's a high probability that the institution will meet its objectives in a sustainable way because it's been measured, budget is set, project is known. But with individual projects, the sustainability is always insecure, really depending on the individual entrepreneur who set it up. And it could continue or it could not. And that has implications for these projects that we've looked at. The longer the project's been in existence, the more insecure it can be considered, because a great amount of effort has gone in, there's value in the site, and yet as an individual project, there must be a time limit to how much one person can do. Now, the ownership of the project, an institutional project has a corporate ownership. Maybe an entire organization owns it, certainly a group of people who have been identified for that. Whereas ownership with an individual project is personal ownership by definition. And finally, the beneficiaries of a project. Who benefits? Well, with an institutional project such as a research library, the library would not continue if they couldn't identify their beneficiaries. Let's say if we don't have people using our resources and our effort, so it's crucial that they know who's benefiting and to what extent. That's part of the legitimation of the use of the resources. But often with the individual projects, beneficiaries is optional, that you hope it's being used. You like to get feedback that it's being used, But even if there's not much information about use, the project continues because it's a passion project. So there's not intended to be judgment in that set of characteristics, but I think there's a big difference between an institutional project and an individual project. And so we've looked at these 14 projects, which, if we were to have a number of columns associated with this, we'd see that some are focused on finding it and providing for us raw data. For example, scanning projects that bring to us texts that previously were unavailable. There are interesting niche projects like the genealogy project that brings very specific data to us through these new technologies. Each of these projects, you'll see, undertakes one or more of those characteristics of finding material, storing it, helping us retrieve it, and in some cases, also sharing the fruits of that by also putting forth the knowledge products that result from scholarship. I'll come to my last slide before I open up for your thoughts on the project and where to from here. I wanted to consider these Baha'i inspired digital portal projects as a collective. What are the desirable attributes if we see them all together? Through our discussion over the series, firstly, we want to ensure that the sites carry accurate and authoritative material. And we noted a number of webmasters who pay particular attention to ensuring the accuracy of their texts, the verification of their optical character recognition in their scanning projects, etc. We want to ensure a complementarity between projects. The last thing that is required when there's scarce resources on these efforts is to have duplication, that find that different portals are undertaking a similar activity in, for example, in scanning or in provision of information that is similarly being provided elsewhere. But there's been no real mapping, I don't think, to see where those areas of duplication are. Now, there's nothing wrong with mirroring on the web, and mirroring is a way of ensuring that should one portal no longer function, that information is available elsewhere. So there is an argument to say that there's nothing wrong with duplication of projects because there might be different ways of achieving an outcome. And let's see which technologies work and which project has the stamina to do so. So it could be that avoiding duplication isn't that necessary. A third desirable element is universal access, that the information is available to all, not behind some sort of paywall. Well, on the other hand, these projects need resourcing, but the idea that knowledge should be available to all who seek it is a desirable attribute. And it's really one of the fundamental values of the UN projects on the information society, is to make sure that knowledge becomes universally available. Obviously, we want these sites to be lawful in the sense that they observe copyright, they observe privacy, etc. And this has been discussed. Copyright laws are generally national in character, but there might be a similarity around the world. And the lawful use of material is also tied to the ethical use of material, particularly cultural norms. There are different cultures around the world that have different points of view on what can be shared, what images can be shared, and what forms of attribution, etc. So there was some discussion of the ethics of information provision, and also sensitive information. We talked about how there might be information that about individuals or families that is regarded as sensitive, and under what conditions is it the right of others to know, and under what conditions is it the right of that family to privacy in the digital era. Maybe we need more discussion around the ethics of privacy in the global age in which I've just said information should be universally available. We hope that these sites are nurturing in the sense that additional talent is drawn in additional expertise is drawn in and developed. And I think that's the desire of all the webmasters that we've had online that are seeking others to work with them. Sustainability is a desirable characteristic of these projects, but I've identified as one of the major concerns of private projects is their sustainability. Depending on one person, the resources and time of one person or a small group doesn't bode well in the long term. I've also noted that the Baha'i World Centre is actively developing its digital reference sites, showing the way, in a sense, provision of the foundational scriptures, the primary documents, which then generate so much other research. But I haven't observed that national institutions and their libraries and archives are yet doing so. Mostly still concerned with the physical preservation of materials, but not moving into the digital era, particularly in providing their catalogs and that sort of thing. We have noted, in contrast, that most sites considered in this series are through individual initiative and resources. And I thought that if we look at the collective and what is the future for these sites and many others, what are the prospects for an informal global network on Baha'i libraries, archives, and portals? Some way of keeping in touch, which is not at that level of a formal association, which distinguishes, for example, between professionals and non-professionals, because a number of the people who are involved in these projects aren't necessarily professional information specialists or archivists or librarians, but they have developed the expertise. And a global network would allow for anybody who's interested in these projects to gather together in some format. But also we still need to make this global. We didn't get all continents participating in the series as I had hoped, partly to do with the time zones, etc. But there might be other factors as well involved there. So what I've done in this presentation is just brought together some thoughts about the demands of information management and knowledge management, together with project management, where they meet those digital technologies, to give a bit of a snapshot of my thoughts at the end of the series. So I welcome your thoughts. We might just go around the boxes that we see online and invite you to share your thoughts. Steve Collins, why don't we start with you?
Hi, agreed with many things. I jotted down sort of 4 arenas that I think I need to maybe speak to. One of them is kind of an update. Since my presentation, which partly was about newspapers and creating a collage of materials and then being able to search through that materials and create outputs from that collection. I don't know if it was because of the presentation or just happened to be good timing, but there was a Baha'i programmer who I've worked with in the past on a project, and he said, so you have a lot of newspapers online that need to be collected somehow, right? I said, well, yeah, I can access these things, but for a lot of other people, this is obscure and remote. And so he offered to work with me. And we turned through my 10 years of collecting newspaper clippings in something like, I don't know, 4 weeks or something like that, digested that all offline with URLs back to the public access, respecting copyright, but having access to the results of that, the OCR data. And I have already since then shipped that off to already 2 other sets of people who are in these presentations. And in theory will be more places, just so that more people can access the same resource in more ways. And while of course the data is scaled very differently in terms of where it comes from, we're talking about 50 to 60,000 items of long or short works, mistakes and bad information, or very interesting good information. So that's kind of an update on that. That's happened literally since the beginning of the series. I look forward to the day, looking back to the pre-digital age. The very first newspaper clipping was the 1845 November 1st clipping that was found in the I believe it was found by Baha'is in the late 1960s or very early 1970s. And it was by the people who love to just, crawl in the corners of libraries and find things. And, a generation later or two, here I am sifting through piles of newspapers, but I'm still doing it kind of semi-manually. So I look forward to the day when an AI system that I could teach could help me search through and find things that I'm missing, because it may be able to make more sense of scanning through hundreds of things looking for the right kind of phrasing. And I think, I found what I'm looking for, but I missed 10 other ones. And then I wanted to amend your idea of the pyramid that goes to knowledge. It kind of assumes there's one point at the end of that pyramid of knowledge. And of course, within the tradition of it, every individual scholar is kind of building a knowledge pyramid, and they're coming to some point, and then the different pyramids are starting to talk to each other, and you get a community of practice. And that reminds me of the Baha'i recent terminology of the individual, the institution, and the community. And in light of that, and in another project I've just initiated, similar background, but with this idea of what is information to me, what is knowledge to me, and what is knowledge to someone else. So for example, the project that I'm literally working on is trying to collect every single place Louis Gregory appeared and gave a talk, and even down to, is the building still there, kind of thing. But for almost all those places, I have not a clue what really is meaningful about that. I just know it's a fact, it's data. But I remember that when I read To Move the World, the fact that Louis Gregory came through my state was a rich moment for me. But that's all it was. And then there was nothing more that I could do about it. Then came Janet Schoen, I can't remember her name, Janet Schoen's book, Champions of Oneness. And when I was reading a footnote, I realized for the first time, I had no conception of this beforehand, that there were letters from Louis Gregory and they knew where they came from. The fact that Louis Gregory sent letters from places and they knew where they came from had never occurred to me. And I immediately asked the National Center for, do you have any letters from Louis Gregory from North Carolina? And there had been hints here and there of Louis Gregory in North Carolina, but now I was able to look at concrete materials and go, oh my God, this is groundbreaking. Nobody in North Carolina knew this particular information. Even though many scholars had gone through all these materials and multiple books had been published, that knowledge was not mine. I was able to redirect that knowledge in another direction. And so when I'm gathering all these places Louis Gregory has been, other communities of folks, other individuals in communities are being able to take that and go in their own direction about what knowledge is. So for example, tomorrow, literally, the Wilmette Institute is giving a presentation, and one of those presenters is going to be using some of the materials I was able to help him find where Louis Gregory appeared. That wasn't in To Move the World, that wasn't in Champions of Oneness, that's new to everybody because we bothered to look, and I knew to look somewhere because someone was asking the same kinds of out of the blue questions. And then the other idea I had was, you hinted at it by the things that we haven't talked about. What are the next fields of endeavor where people are going to be gathering? I know there are people that gather in Facebook, in Discord, and in virtual academies. I know that there's an online university seeking official accreditation by, I don't know exactly what institution, but some kind of official accreditation. And through an individual initiative, someone's trying to create a Baha'i chair of peace at this virtual university that people would take classes in, and try to come up with a curricula and so on. And this is just all in the last year, I think literally in the last 365 days that this all came up. Some of these might be 2 or 3 years old, but if you think of 20 years ago and then now and what will be in 20 years, virtualization, multiple ways of engaging that are just elementally beginning, I guess your last meeting about this group was like in 2003. Is that right?
Yes.
So Wikipedia was just being born at that point. It was in its infancy and was quite hotly debated at that, for example. So maybe one of these arenas will become an online system that will provide a vast new arena for creating communities of action or communities of practice. And that third leg, the institutional, the community, and the individual, will be interfacing more and being able to multi-define knowledge for each of ourselves. Local communities, regional communities, and whatever it is we're going to be changing up to in terms of the changing of history.
Yeah.
Those are my thoughts.
Thank you for that, Stephen. Can I invite Andrew, please?
Thanks, thanks, Graham. So the first thing I'd like to say is thanks for organising this series, which I found really interesting, and just bringing a spotlight on information and how it's used and how it could be used through the Baha'i community. I think Britain is quite visionary. In fact, my take on it is that we can get benefit by looking at it as a design sort of problem, and the problem is how do we design information systems for the Baha'i community very broadly, and the first step in that, I think, is a requirements gathering kind of step, and a device that's used in software engineering a fair bit is the user story, where you ask users to articulate their needs in the form of short stories. Can I share my screen, Graham? Is that? I didn't hear what you said.
Yeah, so I'm just in the process of giving you that permission. Make co-host. There you go.
Sorry.
Oh, it's come off.
No, I shared the wrong one. Sorry.
Right.
So this is just as an example of what it might look like, and I've just put this up in the form of a wiki. But so it's user stories for LSA members, for example. So we say, well, as a person who has the role of an LSA secretary, I want to manage legal recognition and registrations, manage records, manage the calendar, whatever. As a LSA appointed librarian, I want to archive member information. I want to manage physical books, documents, and images. Then if we drill into that, as a manager of physical works, I want to source the physical work, and then there would be a link later on once the user stories are solicited to something like your 400 plus thing, which I wasn't aware of, is a good place to sort of begin to identify the tools that could be used. So that's the first sort of comment that I want to make is that I think that there's benefit in soliciting these user stories. And what typically happens in software design of systems is you don't know what you want. You don't until you begin to articulate it and in fact build it. And it's very much an agile process of revisiting the user stories as you begin to build a system and you become a little bit more familiar with what you actually want. The second point that I wanted to make is that you know, a design is nice for its own sake, but unless it's coupled with a model that makes it sustainable, as you mentioned before, then it really you know, won't translate into practice. And so the parallel design of kind of a business model that would make the acquisition and the sustainability of any tools identified, you know, sustainable into the future is really important. To do that in parallel. Now, it's not so easy to do, but I sort of take a lead from sports associations in this country, in Australia at least, where most, you know, small clubs in most sports have access to really sophisticated online sports management systems and fixture management systems and all sorts of stuff well beyond their means, and it's done because of a pooling of resources. Because you've got thousands of small clubs potentially using a cloud-based, their own instance of a cloud-based system, it makes it attractive for software developers to build those systems. And each one of those thousands of sports clubs really only pay a small subscription levy and have access to a system that would cost them you know, amounts that are well beyond their means on their own. You know? And so IT sort of allows that because you can run the same sort of software in the cloud and everyone can access it. So they're the two main points that I sort of got out of this. And probably the third observation is just, I was just taken aback by the talent, the commitment, the passion, and just how transforming the you know, the individual webmasters that you highlighted, you know, it was just quite inspiring, in fact, to see, well, you know, how committed and how much can be done by, you know, individuals really putting their nose to the grindstone. You know? So thanks very much for the series.
Well, Andrew, thanks for those comments, and also nicely put your tribute to the webmasters, expressed very nicely. Jonah, have you got any thoughts to share with us?
Yes, thank you for including me. Also, because I have to bow out pretty soon. Adib just sent a message to the group chat, commenting on how helpful it would be if we can stay in touch, perhaps with a list server, an email list, or something like that. Of course, we have an email list at Baha'i Library, tech@baha'ilibrary.com. We could easily set up another one just for this group or hijack that group if people want, because it's pretty inactive at the moment. So if people want to be able to continue to communicate with this group that Graham has assembled, we can certainly make that happen. My only comment for now is just thank you again. This was very timely, very necessary. A lot of the people who I've seen their faces on Zoom in the last few months are people whose names I only knew. I never even had seen their faces. I don't get out much. So this was a great way to put us all into contact. And I think that obviously one theme that keeps coming up again and again is how do we share all these diverse databases and information sets? Apparently at this point, still no one has an answer because nothing very cogent has been put forward. I guess the solution doesn't fully exist yet. I look forward to many fruitful discussions over the next year or two, getting this together. I wish I could do more than simply manage, but lacking all the skills that are necessary, I certainly will manage as I can to bring people together as I can, using Baha'i Library possibly as some kind of a central location, perhaps as a domain name, perhaps as a server, whatever. So this looks to be a very exciting couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonah. And let me say at the end of the series, as I did at the beginning, that was Jonah's site and his work over so many decades that inspired this series, because I had such admiration for his single-minded focus on making sure that library got up and running and continued. And we wish you well as you solidify those results into its next stage. I think it's one of those caterpillars coming into a a flowering of a beautiful butterfly or something like that. But it's your work that I think has launched, inspired so many other sites to get started on their work. So thanks so much, Jonah, for being part of this. And yes, everybody will stay in touch. So he's made an offer there. I don't like the idea of making yet more listservs, but maybe I think hijacking a listserv sounds great. And also because you've got Calumet, Steve, I might invite you also to talk about this, but there is the listserv called Calumet, which is about scholarship and books, etc., which could be another type of platform for us to energize on collaboration and global networking. But I'll leave that for others to say. So thanks, Jonah, for that, and invite any other thoughts. We've got catalogers, we've got librarians online, we've got scanners online. So just a few more thoughts while we gather together. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, well, I can make a few comments. Look, Calumet's absolutely appropriate. It's got a very broad terms of reference. It's not just me posting obscure Baha'i books. It should be discussion, it should be conversations, it should be the general business of all of those categories of things around discovery and acquisition and usage. And yeah, so I'm more than happy for it to be part of the traffic on Calumet. So that's an open invitation. The more the merrier. In fact, I would really like to increase the amount of conversations and traffic, and have even contemplated cross-posting some of that stuff to another social media environment that's maybe a bit more visible. But yes, it's a possibility. Thinking about my own projects and where they might go, obviously I've got a little ways to go with cataloguing the National Baha'i Reference Library in New Zealand. But so that'll preoccupy me for the short term, along with ongoing acquisition and enriching existing databases. But I would like to get to the point where you have a network of bibliographers who are contributing to an ongoing process somewhere. So they could even be at some kind of regional or continental level, but it's very orientated towards Western cultures and Western languages. I'm sure we just don't have a visibility into what's happening in Asia proper, or South America, or Africa, or even Central Asia, Kazakhstan, what's going on there. We know that some of these places are producing materials, but we just don't have any insight into it. So the idea of a bibliographic network of kind of reporters or contributors or collaborators, and then centrally pooling that material would be fantastic. So that might mean reaching out to all the world's NSAs and inviting them to spread that proposal, or even nominate people, or put you in touch with individuals that they know have similar kind of interests in aligning them. I guess the common language, because you've got language difficulties, but you can still have a common language or schema for sharing those bibliographic documents, because they are well understood, so that you have a common way to report things. So that'd be one option. And then once that becomes regularized, then a project that Graham and I have often talked about is publishing and making that bibliography available, not necessarily in print, but certainly in some kind of searchable format, and make it a product, productize it, I guess, in some way. I guess that's kind of where I'm at the moment, just carrying on. I hope to have more time to do this work once I retire, but retirement's still a couple of years away. Yeah, but it's been really good to get some momentum going again and rethink about all the different aspects of this work. And if we can increase the coordination and collaboration, that's great. So yeah, I've certainly appreciated it, and it's given me some kind of encouragement as well to keep going, because sometimes it can be quite hard just to truck away at something that the bulk of mankind don't necessarily see the value of today. You're often building capability for the future, so it can be a bit of a lonely experience sometimes, but this mitigates it somewhat. So that's my thoughts this morning.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Anton, please.
I also want to share some thoughts, maybe in line with Steven's words. First of all, of course, let me say thank you for organizing this series. It was very useful and inspiring. So thank you very much for that. And also let me share what makes me sad about this series. It's not what I saw here, but it was what I didn't see, and maybe whom I didn't see here.
Anton, you've muted yourself.
Oh,
Okay.
sorry. Where did you lost me?
You said you didn't see some people here.
Yes, I didn't see here, for example, representatives from Baha'i Internet Agency. I didn't see here people from Baha'i Reference Library.
Okay. Oh, it's just an observation. Okay, well, I'm not sure if Anton's still there. So Stephen, do you want to, Anton, I'm not sure if you're still there, so we just lost you at the moment. Until he comes back, maybe Stephen, you wanted to share something? I think I need to give you that, that ability, just a moment.
I had another follow-up, so to speak, of things. Once I could share, I want to show you another data screen.
Okay.
Thank you. So I assume most of you have already heard that Jimmy Seals had passed. And I thought you'd like to know the Wikipedia is still very busy. So this is the Seals and Crofts articles traffic. Again, this is all public information, and this is a logarithmic scale. So it goes up quite high when the news of his passing came along. This graph is the Baha'i Faith article traffic. And you can see it also bumps up and then follows a pattern similar to the Seals coverage. And it's still actually above what it was doing, which was in the high 3,000s to low 4,000s of views per day. And it's still in the high 4,000s to low 4,000s. So it hasn't even yet dropped back down to the background. This shape is actually kind of a new phenomenon. If you go back, if you found early data and looked for spikes and things, all those spikes, I may have mentioned this the first time, most of those spikes last a day or two. And it's really since around 2017, in my observation, that these have become waves of interest. And I don't have any simple explanation about why, but for what it's worth, seals and crops are still affecting the population and generating interest in the faith in general. And it's showing itself in waves of interest and not just in spikes of interest, which also shows Wikipedia is another place where you can sort of measure that. That was what I wanted to say.
Oh, thanks, Stephen. And that ability to do those metrics is really important. And that's one example through Wikipedia, but there are many other types of metrics available, which we haven't looked at in this series because that's the technical detail, but it's there to look at. Now, I'm just wondering if anybody else online has some feedback on the series as they've seen it, or thoughts on the future. Open invitation.
Is Anton still there? Or?
Anton, I've checked, but I can't hear him. So.
Okay, well, I just thought I might just make a comment about the absence of the Baha'i World Centre. I'm not sure, Graham, if you actually explicitly invited anybody from there, but the thing is that their domain is the World Centre primarily, and so that's where their focus and orientation typically is. And so my experience and observation is that, you know, the World Centre libraries serve the World Centre, and the World Centre is the kind of guardian of the repository of sacred texts, doesn't need to reach out beyond its own sphere. So I'm not sure it's a criticism as much, but it's just an
no, it's not
observation.
criticism. The librarians know about the project and very happy about it. But when you're working at the World Centre, you're not able in your individual capacity to comment in projects such as this.
Yeah.
So they're just observing this, and similarly the Baha'i Internet Agency are aware of this series and you know, very happy for it to proceed as it is. So, but didn't feel a need to come in and participate.
Yeah. So I thought it'd be useful just to say those things just for Anton's benefit. There's no explicit exclusion or avoiding those categories.
Okay, thank you.
So, Graham, you've talked about possibility of perhaps scheduling a face-to-face conference sometime. Is this something you'd like to do once normality returns, if it returns?
If normality returns, let me just bring up that potential topic of planning into the future, an event at which we do reach out to national Baha'i communities to see if their archivists and librarians could contemplate coming together in a manner that we did achieve at Landig in 2003. We had maybe 40 people came together and gave a very detailed report on their holdings, their administrative challenges, their plans. And we didn't achieve that in this series, which focused on portals. But I think the idea of getting a sense of where National Baha'i libraries and archives are at, for the benefit of everybody involved, is a good idea. And it might be a group such as this could nourish that idea and then work toward it. It would take some planning, and it would have to have a clear, positive benefit to everybody if they were to invest in that. But yes, that's the idea, Steve. I'm thinking somewhere like Europe, you know, where people can get to.
Yeah, so maybe 2024 and somewhere like Akuto or something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah.
I've hinted at that sort of thing with Mujan as well, occasionally, just saying, you know, as a active administrator of a physical library, to the idea of and coming together, if we can define the benefits of coming together, to see if that's possible. Stephen, you also had another thought?
On that topic, I'll just say that personally, my budget as an individual non-institutional scholar rarely includes the opportunity to travel to conferences, and practically never happens. But I wanted to speak to Alexander's comment as well, that he was concerned about maybe the community of practice is too small, and maybe there's just a limitation. And he said, especially at least, or at least in Europe. And I wanted to mention another project that I hadn't mentioned, is in here. Janet Weibers, I believe, sorry, Jennifer Weibers, pronunciation, I'm not sure, has been one of a number of people who've been holding sort of Zoom conferences. She's been doing meetings out of Germany, inviting mostly Europeans, actually crossing into Russia and Ukraine, and somewhat the West as well, gathering opportunities for oral histories, where people who remembered meeting Hands of the Cause or had been involved in some major activity to share their stories as an oral history, and then recording those sessions. And they're becoming an archive, and she's even re-showing them on occasion. But then also these are going to become a kind of repository that are going to wind up somewhere. She's figuring out where. So there's that aspect too, that there's other kinds of meetings that might be completely worthwhile for what we're talking about that we just weren't aware of. I mean, literally 2 months ago, I wasn't aware that she was doing this, and I had missed most of the hands by that point. And I've managed to go back and catch a couple of these now. And my group, there's a group that I have that we're trying to have these kinds of meetings, and not so much oral history gathering, but sort of how-tos. Hey, how did I find that information? How did you find that information? Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, I didn't know that, kind of thing. And then we help each other create knowledge in our process. And I hope there's evidence somewhat, I don't know if I want to call it a groundswell yet, but where I used to think of myself as a local history researcher, isolated and hard to find anyone to work with, I am now finding other people in other states who are actively beginning their process or have begun their process. And I'm becoming aware that there were people some time ago who had done some of these things, but now we have a few people at the same time beginning to do this kind of thing. So I think there's more happening than we may think is happening. I'm sure there's more happening than we think is happening, but we're maybe approaching a stage where that's beginning to multiply, maybe.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you, Stephen. That's great. So we'll come down to any last comments about the series. The invitation remains open for anybody to share their thoughts on how they viewed it and what the future holds.
This is a chance to ask Mujan about what's happening in.
Sorry, ask me about what?
Oh, what do you think? Where to from here, Mujan? So, in maybe
I really don't know. You know, I'm not a professional librarian, and although I have charge of a library, as it were, I'm very much stumbling around in the dark. So I attend these sort of meetings really to learn, not to give my opinion, because I'm not sure that I've got anything very specific to contribute. I mean, yeah, I don't know. There's got to be, I think, you know, if we're going to ask people to go to the expense of actually sort of traveling and getting together, it seems to me there's got to be some very specific benefit to it, because we can all sit around and chat on Zoom. What extra plus is there in getting together? We've got to actually think in terms of that. I mean, it is good to consult together in face to face, but then if you're by that process excluding quite a number of people who can't afford or don't have the time to go, to whatever it is that you set up, then do the benefits outweigh the disadvantages or not?
Yeah, I think it's a very valid point. We didn't have this internet capacity when we did the landing conference. But we just, I mean, the topic is still there, and whether we meet, but the groundwork is necessary anyway. I just wanted to ask Masud if you happen to know whether there is any informal network amongst the institutional Baha'i national libraries and archives, or do they just each individually do their own work?
Not that I know of, really. Individually, you know, Australia, for instance, 3 years ago, when I came back from the World Centre, there were some attempts, you know, to put the National Library in some kind of order and so on. And I hear, of course, from Steve that he's been perhaps the most active, you know, Baha'i librarian to organize the Baha'i National Library of New Zealand. Other than that, you know, to my knowledge, there hasn't been any sort of networking among the national assemblies.
So it would seem that'd be one place to start, to see if there is interest in learning from each other and sharing ideas about what are the stages of development of cataloging and storage and usage policy, and take it from there. And similarly with the archive side of things, because I know that there are a number of significant Baha'i archives now in the world, and they're all doing their own work, which is taking up all of their time and focus to just manage. And I am in touch with some of those people in Africa who have got individual challenges in front of them. So there is room for networking, and I think that's the first stage. I think you go ahead.
Sorry. Go ahead.
No, nothing else to say.
Oh, okay. Well, I was just wondering whether there'd be any, is it premature to set a goal of creating some sort of a, on the librarian side I'm talking now, set a goal of creating a, how should I say, a master catalog that everyone can then download the record, the records of, and use. I mean, that would seem to me to be the next obvious stage, which would be of benefit to every librarian of, of national librarians, local librarians, and so on. If there was a master catalog somewhere where they could go, if they've got a book in front of them that their library has just acquired, to go to the master catalog and download the record for that book and just put it onto their system, as it were, so that and that would incorporate, and the master catalog will incorporate within it a system of subject indexing and so on. It seems to me that would be a huge benefit, so that everyone is not sitting around entering data over and over again all around the world. But is it premature to go for that goal?
Or maybe it's good to be preemptive in that. So you're talking about agreement on classification system. And if the librarians can agree on classification system, then that sharing can take place. So Steve, what's your thought on that?
I've often thought about this. I would love to, get a dump of the World Centre's catalog, as some sort of data file as a starting point. But I don't, as you say, they're not sure that they've even agreed on the classification system. They've changed it several times over the last few decades, so I don't know if we'd even align. But you'd have the raw facts of the book. But I do know that they focus on internally produced Baha'i materials, and they don't pay too much attention to stuff produced outside of the Baha'i community because it's readily available in many, many other libraries. So for now, they're focused on collecting internally generated material. So it wouldn't necessarily be everything anyway, but
Well, I mean,
the last number
yeah.
I heard was 155,000 items, but that was 10 years ago. So it's could well be over 200,000 items. That would certainly save a lot of time, but that would be the best library to start with. I would certainly like it. So maybe it's just a matter of writing to them and saying, what do you think? But they also might not want their material publicly available, but they might be willing to do it on a private basis. I don't know. I've thought about it, but never had the courage to write in case they say no. But it's a possibility. Just
Yeah.
it's an Oracle system, so it would be a database dump. Then you'd have to have an Oracle database to restore it to initially probably, and then transform it into some other system. So Oracle databases are not free, but you could probably do some cloud thing for a month or two to get your data in the shape you wanted. Thought about it, done anything with it, done with the idea.
Well, how much do you reckon the budget would be for such a thing, the Oracle database that you're talking about?
Well, yeah, you can probably rent one for, I don't know, so much per month. I wouldn't, or even get a trial database, as long as you didn't sort of make revenue from it. You might be able to get a sort of developer edition just as a means to get the data out into a more open source sort of format. Haven't looked at that because I haven't seen the shape of the data, haven't seen the shape of the World Centre data. But yeah, I don't think that would be the huge blocker, the cost of doing that. It would be take more time effort than money cost.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I know that the World Centre, I was on the point of, I mean, I had agreement in principle to download the data from the World Centre, to receive a sort of data download from the World Centre. But then when I looked into it further, I just couldn't see how to proceed, because they were using Bill Collins's system, and then after Bill Collins left, and I don't know, at some stage after that, not immediately after that, more fairly recently, say within the last 4 or 5 years, or maybe 6 or 7 years, they switched to another system, and they haven't gone and back cataloged their old existing books. So their books actually exist with two different sets of cataloging.
So there you go. It'll rule out.
And it just seemed to me, I couldn't see what I would do with it, with a download of that sort of data. It seemed to me, well, I don't know. Anyway, we didn't proceed with it anyway.
Okay. I imagine the modern system would allow you to export marked files. The replacement system would be, I don't know, there's quite a lot of Israeli companies that run these library systems. I think Voyager is one they use in New Zealand. It's an Israeli-based
theirs is a
library vendor. Yeah, so they're a big player in the library market. So they would be able to export the files in marked format, but yeah, the prior system, it's a bit of an unknown. Well, if you think they're open to the idea, then maybe it is worth exploring it and not just assuming that it can't be done. So Mujan, if you use your influence and get the file, I'm happy to see what we can do with it. Because it's often the historical stuff that's hard to obtain, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anything in the last 20 years is probably going to be online somewhere, anywhere in WorldCat or Google will find it, but anything prior to the 1970s is going to be quite hard, prior to the internet.
Right.
Well, probably on that note, we might bring this session to a close, and thank you all for being part of it. And maybe there'll be another series in the future. So thanks everybody for participating.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Graham. Bye.